get started this meeting, you should have received the minutes for the meetings that we had on February 10th, 11th, and 15th through email. Were there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes for February 10th, 11th, and 15th. Motion made by Representative Helgerson, seconded by Representative Estes. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Committee, are there any bill introductions this morning? All right, seeing none. We were actually going to be having the budget presentations by Chairman Sutton, but he is not in the room as of yet. Well, there he is. He just entered. You what? Are you prepared to do your budget presentations right now, or do you want to move on to the bill hearings? Okay. All right. Chairman Sutton, if you please indicate which budget you're going to be starting with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'm thinking there ought to be a spot for me somewhere, shouldn't there?
Nice move kicking Representative Francis off the committee. That was neat. All right, let's get started with, surprisingly, two easy budgets today. Let's start with the Department of Administration. All right, the agency has requested an estimated, oh, that's page number, it's volume 1, 279, by the way. No, you can't kick Kathy out of her chair. She's necessary.
The Democrats gained a vote.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he doesn't have a chair anymore, so we got Nick.
This includes $155.4 million of SGF and $36.1 million from ELARF and $21.3 million in transfers from the State Highway Fund. This represents a reduction of $4.6 million below the amount approved by the 21 legislature. Reduction is primarily attributable to a lapse of $4.6 million SGF for savings related to the issuance of pension obligation bonds. The 2021 legislature added $28.8 million SGF for estimated debt service payments for bonds. That was HB 2405, which authorized the issuance of up to $500 million in bonds plus costs at an interest rate not to exceed 4.3% in 2021. Am I mistaken? What's going on? I'm seeing sideways looks.
Still no chair.
Oh. It's like, come on, we voted on this. I know you remember it. In August 2021, the Kansas Development Finance Authority finalized and executed the bond purchase agreement with an interest rate of 2.7%. Accordingly, debt service payments decreased from $28.8 million, which was estimated at the interest cap of 4.3%, to $24.2 million, the lower rate of 2.7%. The revised estimate includes a lapse of the difference, which is $4.6 million. Additionally, the revised estimate includes a lapse of $30,000 SGF to reflect a decrease in CAPER's contribution rates from 15.09% to 14.33% in '22, based on the issuance of these bonds, because we paid down CAPERs. The revised estimate also includes $87.7 million in off-budget expenditures and $373.7 off-budget FTE positions, which are categorized as such to avoid double counting. Remember that the Department of Administration is the landlord for many of our agencies, and so their rent is paid to the agency, but we don't want that to be reflected as revenue because it's already counted as an expenditure by the agency. So it would be double counting. The revised estimate also includes, the increase is primarily due, to maintenance and servicing fees across many of the agency's programs, which is about $1.7 million. The governor recommends spending $1 billion. I just wanted to emphasize billion in on-budget expenditures and 94 on-budget FTE positions in '22, including $947.8 million SGF, $1 million from ELARF, and $21.3 million in transfers from the State Highway Fund. This represents an increase of $792.4 million above the which is 365%, by the way, above the agency's revised estimate. The most significant increase is attributable to the governor's recommendation to expend $460 million SGF for a one-time $250 tax rebate to eligible Kansas residents. This rebate occurs as a one-time direct payment only during election years, and all Kansas residents who filed a I'm sorry, was that not in your copy? All right. Sorry, that was in my copy. This rebate occurs as a one-time direct payment to all Kansas residents who filed a 2020 tax return in 2021 would be eligible. The Office of the Governor estimates that this payment would affect over 1.2 million resident taxpayers. The recommended amount includes expenditures for the rebate itself, as well as for the administrative costs of sending out those checks. The governor's recommendation also includes $332 million SGF to pay off 2 bonds early. This one I applauded, ahead of scheduled final debt service payments in fiscal year 2035. First, the recommendation includes $160.5 million SGF to pay off Series 2015A, which consists of 4 debt service refunding bonds, debt service for the John Redmond Reservoir, and debt services for a University of Kansas Medical Center Health Education Building. The recommendation includes debt service payments of $27.8 million and the remaining balance, $132.7 million for 2023. Second, the recommendation includes $171.8 million SGF to pay off Series 2015G, which is a debt service bond for the state's portion of the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility located in Manhattan. The recommendation includes debt service payments, $17.4 million, and the remaining balance, which is $154.3 million for 2023. Debt service payments in '22 for both bonds are already included in the agency's revised estimate, and the governor does not recommend adjustments to that amount. The governor's recommendation also includes $200,000 SGF and 5 FTE positions for the Division of the Child Advocate within the Office of Public Advocates. Executive Order 2127 created the Office of Public Advocates within the agency and transferred the following entities to it. The Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, the CanCare Ombudsman, and the Division of the Child Advocate. The recommendation also, and we can go into details on what those are and how much they cost if you like. The recommendation also includes $87.7 million in off-budget expenditures and $373.7 off-budget FTE positions, which is the same as the agency's revised estimate for '22. surprisingly enough, the Budget Committee concurred with the governor's recommendation, and here's the rationale. There have been a lot of promises made. We have the commerce project going on. We have food sales tax on the table. We have a $250 random check on the table. I fully expect this to be part of a much bigger discussion as to what's actually feasible at the end of the day. So while there was strong consideration of taking the $475 million out of this budget, and the reason it was in D of A, by the way, not Department of Revenue, is because it would be the Department of Administration that actually writes the checks. So it went through this agency. There's not a real firm template for where this sort of a scheme would go. So it went through D of A, who writes the checks, who would actually send them out. I figured it was the thought of the committee that this is probably going to be part of a much bigger discussion when we get a little bit further on down the road. And I'll stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Chairman Sutton, and you are correct. This is going to be a much larger discussion as we are trying to put the budget back together in the latter part of this month. I have a question in regards to the paying off of the bonds.
Yes.
Do we have the cost savings that would be by paying those bonds off early?
I have had that. I don't know if I have that here with me. Do you happen to have that sheet? They handed us that sheet.
And if you could, just a cumulative amount of what that cost savings would be.
The number 50 million per annum comes to mind, but let me make sure I'm telling the truth on that.
That's fine.
It's been a couple of weeks since we worked this budget. Oh. I'm phoning a friend, and Mr. Wu will be getting back to you he'll be getting back to me in just a moment.
All right, that's fine. We'll go ahead and see if there's any other questions. Representative Helgerson.
Could staff tell us, are there any other instances other than the 400 and whatever million dollars,
75?
$475 million that require statutory changes in the Department of Administration for them to be in place? Meaning, do we have some places that the governor has put in changes in the budget that require us to act first, which is contrary to our policy?
Chairman Sutton.
I'm not sure I'm even following the question exactly.
Governors have a tendency to assume either tax increases or something else before the statute is passed. Right. Our policy, which I brought up yesterday, was that we take it out of the bill until the bill passes. Are there any other instances other than a proviso that change this budget in the Department of Administration?
No, I wouldn't say so. Nothing comes to mind anyway.
Representative Helgerson.
Well, I brought it up yesterday because hate to say this, but if this is going to be pulled out, a Democrat should pull it out and defend the process, because putting in a tax reduction when the legislature hasn't acted and change the budget process is contrary to what we do in the appropriation bill. I think that may be appropriate. I can't even remember if tax committee, and a couple of us are in there, have had this if we've seen this bill, but it is a bill that needs to be introduced and passed at a minimum by one body. And if it hasn't been passed by both bodies, we don't put it in the budget. So, yeah, I'll take the heat. I'll make a motion because it's necessary to do that to defend our process. And if you don't do this, then you're going to open it up for other governors to start playing games with the budget, and we've all seen those over the years. So I'll make a motion that we pull out the $475 million and wait till the bill is passed.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Sutton. Discussion on the motion. Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you. So you're pulling this out. I just want to make sure I understand, because you believe there has to be a bill passed before we can do this. I don't think that's the case, but we could probably get confirmation on that.
Representative Helgerson?
That's why I asked the question whether or not a statutory requirement was necessary. I'm guessing if the reviser says that the governor can automatically give away $475 million without statutory authority or with a proviso, that's news to me.
Well, we're having a discussion with the revisor's office right now, and no, there does not need to be a bill, because this is part of the governor's budget recommendation, which ultimately has to fall under the purview of the legislature when we pass the budget. She recommended this in her budget when she relayed that to us on January 13th. This is, I will say, the process of falling under the Department of Administration, as Chairman Sutton had so eloquently described when he gave his budget presentation. But no, there does not need to be a bill, because this is part of the recommendation from the governor in her budget. Representative Helgerson.
Well, then I stand corrected. We have before us a very unusual policy of giving away $475 million and putting into a budget. And we have a subcommittee that's now made a recommendation that we pass that.
Any further comments?
Yeah, don't look at me.
I thought he was looking at me.
Okay, so it comes down to, do we believe that $475 million should be appropriated? And then now we have the policy issue, not the issue of should the governor put it into her budget, but that the governor or governors in the future can put direct appropriations, and the subcommittee has made the recommendation. And I am making the motion that we pull the $475 million out, because I don't think that's how the money should be spent. And I'm pretty consistent on it, and, you know, we can talk about it either in omnibus, or we can talk about it and how it fits with tax committee, but I'm just not comfortable with it at this point, so I'll make the motion.
Well, you already have.
Okay.
We're on the motion right now. And so I would say, obviously, all of us in this room, with the exception of Representative Woodard, are seasoned in here. And I don't mean that to sound negative. Wow. But just to remember that nothing is ever dead until we start actually discussing the budget. So I didn't mean to implicate anything, Representative Woodard. But we had the discussion in regards to how we want to move forward with the budget when we're putting the budget together. And obviously, this is going to be an item that we're going to be discussing later on when we start looking at the budget. Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd remind the committee about the Apex bill. And if we are successful in bringing a company and we are going to pay out large sums of money, we've asked the governor to find that money in her budget. This would be a possible place that she could do that, but that decision is hers to make, not ours. Thank you.
Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. One, I can't see 475 million in here. Is it 460 million for it? We're talking about the $250 refund checks. The motion is incorrect, I think. The other thing is what we're doing here is creating a bill which becomes our appropriations bill, right? So it will be passed in a bill, whatever's in.
Oh, correct. Yeah, it'll be in the budget bill.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And just for clarification, the amount from research is $460 million in regards to this tax rebate gift. So that's the amount, $460 million. Representative Wolfmore.
I was just going to suggest before I could vote on this, I would like to see an updated profile from the governor's office that I think Representative Halgerson asked for that to be presented once before in committee, so we could kind of see with Apex in it what our profile actually looks like with the $250, with everything in it. We could actually see a profile. I think that would help us make a decision one way or another. Is that possible, Mr. Chair?
It's possible, yes.
Okay, could we request a profile such as that, so we could see? I got to work with real numbers when I make these decisions.
Well, they're projections, they're not real numbers.
Well, I'd like to see even projections.
We can possibly do that.
Thank you.
Representative Helgerson.
I didn't have my glasses on, so I stand corrected. It is the 460. But and you're correct. But I'd also echo a little bit what the representative just said. I was here till 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock last night going through budgets. I looked at what the governor's scenario is for this year and current year. And I believe that there's probably sufficient funds to do the mega bill, which I voted against because I didn't agree with the policy. Even if this is in here, it is whether or not we believe that the money should be given out in an appropriation, and whether or not this is the best purpose for the for this $460 million. Now, I'll tell you, and some of you have heard this, we have approximately, from when I made the 2% reduction last year amendment, which you all I'm sure remember, we have brought in approximately, according to JG and I sitting down, $2.7 billion of additional revenue that has either come into the coffers and or is now projected in. That's over a couple of years, but that's how much additional money that we have into the coffers now. We have never had that amount of money. In my calculation, it was like 33% increase of revenue in 1 year. In my 40 years of being involved in state government and budgeting, that's never happened. Does that make me scared and nervous? You better believe it. So I take the position of being ultra conservative because I don't think this gravy train is going to last. And some of you have heard me in text, some of you have heard me in Democrat caucus, and it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican governor. I don't believe that we should spend that money right now until we have a balanced fiscal plan that the legislature agrees with. Governors, I think, balance it under the assumptions they're making and under the decisions they've made. This works. But I take a position that I am more conservative. I want to pay more debt down. I want to build more of an ending balance than the current governor. So those are my biases. That's why I'm making the motion to pull it out.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the comments about nothing dying till we leave. So with that, I think we do need more time to look at this, and rather than just deleting this completely, I'm going to make a substitute motion that we delete the $460 million but review it omnibus.
All right, committee, you've heard the substitute motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Wolfmore. Now we're on the substitute motion. Any discussion on the substitute motion? Representative Ballard.
Thank you. Actually, I wanted to speak to the other one, but since there's a substitute motion, thank you, Mr. Chairman, I will support it. I've looked at many budgets over the years, and I have seen where governors have put lots of things in their budgets, and it's up to us as legislators to approve it or not approve it, and that has happened for many, many years, so this is no exception. I'm looking at what it's for and everything else. Maybe there's a disagreement with what it's for. I'll vote for the substituted motion because I really was going to vote against the first motion. Thank you.
Representative Alcala.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still debating whether I want to vote for the substitute motion. My comments are, my colleague, on his first motion, and I know this, but it's related. We've done this for years, this process, since I've been on this committee. I don't want to change the method or the process of what we do. The subcommittee brought this forward. They left it in there. And many governors before have done this based off their recommendations. I just think that we're creating a new process that could be the norm, and I just think that it negates and takes away from our subcommittee and from the process of the governor making whoever the governor is making their recommendation. I disagree with both of them, and I think I'll stay with the recommendation from the subcommittee.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a question for the chairman. Wouldn't it make more sense to leave it in and if we're going to review it anyway, than having to put it back in? It just seems like we're going to accomplish the same thing by reviewing it at omnibus that Representative Helgerson mentions. And so if we're going to end up in the same place reviewing it, it just seems like you might as well leave it be, and then it's easier to remove than reinserting it back in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Was that a question directed to me? Yeah. Basically, you're correct. If we're going to move it to omnibus, or if we're going to review it when we're doing the budget bill in the latter part of March, it's going to be the same end game. So I would say probably just leave it in, and we'll have the discussion later. Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was hoping that the motion would lead to these very persuasive comments, so I would be willing to withdraw my motion, substitute motion.
Is that fine with the second? Okay, we're back on the initial motion since the substitute motion has been withdrawn. Representative Estes.
Thank you. I had a question for the Budget Committee Chair, but I didn't get to ask it, but the answer would impact my decision on this. And my question is, you know, when we think about giving people $250, that seems like something. Did the committee take any stab at estimating, instead of that, you pay off debt, and therefore in the future we lower what we're taking out of their pockets in taxes, if people would gain more through that process than if we just handed $250 that they still are paying for with their taxes?
Chairman Sutton.
Certainly with the other recommendations, there was discussion about debt reduction, certainly. With regard to that particular $460 million, there was not, however. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, I have the answer back on the amount of savings on those bonds by paying them off. I know we are, but I was going to answer you anyway. We'll go back. Okay.
That question after we have the motion discussion. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing Representative Helgerson.
I had not thought of this question before, and so I'm asking the chairman or anyone else, is the $250 rebate or appropriation taxable to those individuals?
Revisor is saying yes, it is.
I don't see how it couldn't be.
So we're giving a $250 income, which is taxable. Okay.
Yes. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Helgerson, you may close.
Yes, we can put it off to omnibus. We could put it back off to a special session. We could put it back off to whatever. I think the majority of people have already made the decision. I think I personally do not agree with it. I also believe that you can afford to do that under the governor's scenario, but I don't agree with the governor's scenario. And even though a Democrat's doing it, that's what's appropriate for this body. Structure your budget without that $460 million, because then we can decide whether or not we're going to put in $50, $100 million, or $200 million into a different budget, and I won't happen to mention which one I'm expecting that to come out of. But let's not put off this decision if in our hearts we've already made the decision. The sales tax discussion is going to happen today and next week. Let's make some decisions and move ahead with the budget and tax policy and not wait for the last few days of the session. I'll move the motion.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it. Motion fails. Now back to Chairman Sutton with the answer to the question.
Very good. My memory was half right. It was $50 million. That was only for the MBAF. In total, we're talking about $80 million a year.
Thank you, Chairman Sutton. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so back to the FTEs for this year, and you can review the 2023 when you come to 2023 on that, but there are increases, and so I'm looking at page 292, and it is an increase of 5 new positions, And it says that they are from the public advocates, or if I'm reading it, 2022 is not from public advocates, but then 2023 is. And so maybe you could either address it in 2023, but we're adding positions. So what are those new positions and what's the balance cost of those new positions?
Yep. All of that is, and you'll find it reflected in the 22 as well. The Division of Child Advocate is where you're going to see those. The long-term care ombudsman, the CAN Care Ombudsman, and the Division of the Child Advocate. That's where those 5 FTEs are, and it's just a transfer over from a different agency.
Okay, so those are programs with...
Sorry, the Child Advocate is the only one that's new FTEs, because that program didn't exist in 21.
Okay, so there's 3 listed, so one of them has 2 FTEs with it?
The other 2 were already counted within the budget. The Division of Child Advocate is the only one that's new. There was just a reshuffling of
Okay, but it does
sub-agencies.
show the agency estimate for 2022 as 462.7, and now it's 467.7. That's 5 new positions. So I didn't know if they're all filled or not.
Yeah, that's the Division of the Child Advocate that didn't exist prior.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on the debt pieces, I've wondered about a few things with where we go, et cetera. On the issues that we have, do we have an estimate, or do we know what our current rate is and an estimate of what it would be refinanced to and our amortization period? And was there any discussion of rolling other debt together with that?
There wasn't discussion of rolling additional debt in. As I'm recalling, we're paying these off, and so there wouldn't be a new rate involved.
So the current rate would be interesting, and I would be curious if we would look at a number of pieces with debt, knowing that there's also a little bit with the KBI to look at and what to do with that 40 million. The question that we touched on with water yesterday and the water bonds that were 0 to maybe 156 million if we did all 5 reservoirs, and the timing of those things and whether the opportunity is such that we look at that. Also, in light of a proposal we have to reduce the debt in Capers at 7 3/4 and trying to maximize current rates, reinvestment of those dollars different ways.
I agree. I think that'd be a great discussion.
So,
Exactly.
if we had that, would we want to potentially look at that separately? Would that be one we would review at omnibus to either take out or redirect to say, how do we pay off the 160, the 170, the 40, and any part of the water that made sense to deal with in the current rate environment?
You got me. I think that would be certainly an appropriate omnibus discussion. The problem that I'm seeing in looking at this specific budget is that some of those bonds are in different areas. So, I think that would have to be a larger picture.
Yeah. So, and I don't know, Mr. Chair, how it would be best to proceed. There's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. If indeed we're going to pay them off, then that decision is easier. If we wanted to take advantage of rates, we might want to start down that road of exploring what we would refinance at this point in time, also knowing that the 2015 A and G bonds are probably, I'm not sure that those are available today to refinance. I think their call date is pending as opposed to current. So a number of timing things to figure out how to put it together. But I'd like to have a handle on how we handled the set of the debt before I firmly moved forward on which ones to pay off, if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely. I would probably add for your consideration, first off, the interest rate on these is about 5% on both of these bonds. Secondly, the Senate has already passed a bill that pays off these bonds. So it could still be, I think, part of a bigger discussion, but these two are already kind of on the chopping block.
Okay. I'm not sure then if we want to leave these in at the current time or how we might best want to proceed on that. based on the
Do
previous
you
discussion.
happen to know what the Senate bill is that paid these bonds off?
I do not, but I think I know someone who does. You happen to know the Senate bill, would you?
And obviously, if that bill would happen to come over to the House and we would pass it and then goes to conference and then goes to the governor, we would make adjustments in the budget and the language. Obviously, the amount itself would be in the budget, but
Right.
we would make clarification
That was
notes in
paid
regards to.
through Senate Bill, whatever.
Exactly.
Right.
Any further discussion on fiscal year 2022? Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just kind of wondering on going back to Representative Williams' questions on the FTEs. Number one, are they classified? Number two, what are those positions for? Exactly. Do we have titles for them?
No idea.
Could we have the volume turned up, please?
She's asking if those are classified positions and what those position
All
job
right,
titles are.
thank you, Chairman Sutton.
That was the question. I don't have the answer with me here. I'm going to have to get back with you. I didn't look at their job titles.
Representative Landwehr.
Well, I'm just a little bit concerned on that. And then I'm also concerned with where the child advocate comes from.
Chairman Sutton.
Executive Order 2128.
Thank you.
Any further discussion in regards to fiscal year 2022? Seeing none, you may move on to 2023.
Where did Stephen go? That was 447, I think he said, Senate Bill 447, by the way.
All right, thank you.
All right, well, that was so easy. Let's go on to 2023. The agency requests $215 million in on-budget expenditures, 89 on-budget FTE positions, including for 23. This includes $159 million SGF, $36.1 million ELARF, and $15.9 million from the State Highway Fund. Represents a reduction of $1.9 million below the agency's revised estimate for 22. The request includes an overall reduction of $2 million for changes in debt service expenditures. Of that amount, there's an increase of $3.5 million SGF, offset by reductions of $4,000 from ELARF and $5.5 million from the Bank of KDOT. There are 5 sets of bonds included within this adjustment. The State House renovation bonds, $2.3 million reduction, which were issued for the renovation of the Kansas State House. Series 2015A, a $1 million increase, which includes 4 debt service refunding bonds, debt service for the John Redmond Reservoir, and debt service for a University of Kansas Medical Center education building. Also, Series 2015G, which is the state's portion of NBAF, located in Manhattan, and Series 2020R, $3.1 million reduction, which refunded bonds related to renovations of the Kansas State House, the NBAF, and public broadcasting facilities. And Series 2021P, a $5.8 million increase, which refunded bonds related to renovations of the Kansas State House, the NBAF, Kansas State Fairgrounds, and the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. The request also includes $89.5 million in off-budget expenditures and $373.7 off-budget FTE positions, which are categorized as such to avoid double counting, as I mentioned, as I explained in the 2022 budget. The increase is primarily due to higher expenditures for workman's comp claims, $420,000, and building rent of $863,000. The governor recommends $290.6 million in on-budget expenditures and $96.9 on-budget FTE positions for 23, including $250 million SGF. That's a lot less than $1 billion, isn't it? $36.1 million from ELARF and no state highway fund appropriations. This represents an increase of $75.5 million or 26% above the agency request. The most significant increase is attributable to the governor's recommendation to appropriate $120 million SGF for the rehab and repair of the docking office building. Not a bond. Do you hear that? I kind of like the sound of it myself. Probably a mistake. The 2021 legislature added language authorizing the Department of Administration to issue up to $120 million in bonds for the docking building, subject to approval from the State Finance Council. Incorporating recommendations from the Joint Committee on State Building Construction and the State Finance Council, approved the renovation of the docking building into a 3-story building with office size and meeting space. The Office of the Governor indicates this proposal would utilize the budget surplus to fund the project in its entirety rather than incurring additional debt. The Governor also recommends ending extraordinary transfers from the Department of Transportation beginning in '23. For the Department of Administration, this includes an increase of 15.9 million SGF and a corresponding 15.9 decrease in transfers from KDOT. The 15.9 million allocated to this agency funds debt service payments for the state and allocated to this agency. Oh yeah, it funds debt service payments. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I didn't understand what I was saying. And adopting the recommendation would result in such payments being primarily made from SGF instead of the Bank of KDOT. The recommendation also includes a reduction of 45.2 million SGF to account for the governor's proposal to pay off 2015A series, 2015G, the bonds associated with those titles. If those bonds are paid off in '22, then those budgeted expenditures would not continue into '23. When you pay off your mortgage, you stop paying for your house. The recommendation also includes, except for property tax, the recommendation also includes an increase of $725,000 and 8 FTE positions for the Office of Public Advocates. This includes expenditures for the KenCare Ombudsman, 3 FTE positions, and the Division of Child Advocate, which is 5 FTE positions. The recommendation also includes $89.5 million in off-budget expenditures and $373.7 off-budget FTE positions, which is the same as the agency request. The Budget Committee concurs with the governor's recommendations with a couple of adjustments. This is an election year, so the Friends of Cedar Crest visited us. We wanted to add $15,000 SGF to reimburse the Friends of Cedar Crest Association for expenditures related to a potential gubernatorial transition in '23. This amount would be in addition to the $150,000 SGF allocated to the Division of Budget for gubernatorial transition expenditures, which is already included in the governor's recommendation. The concern there was we authorize $150,000 to the Division of the Budget. That very rarely, a much smaller amount trickles down to the Friends of Cedar Crest, and they're not able to do things like replace mattresses, which, yeah, that's kind of necessary. So we did agree with that request. Also, one of those unintended consequences of doing away with the vehicle modernization surcharge is that we need to transfer $500,000 of SGF, or we recommend, we don't need to, we recommend, the Budget Committee recommends transferring $500,000 from SGF to the Digital Imaging Program Fund for '23 to replace revenue otherwise received from the vehicle modernization surcharge. The governor concurred with the agency request for '23. Oh, wait, where am I reading? I'm on the wrong page, for crying out loud. Under current law, a $4 surcharge is applied when vehicles are registered. We all know what the vehicle modernization surcharge is. The governor's recommendation includes a proposal to eliminate the surcharge, and Representative Prail got it axed on the House floor, which is, I supported, by the way. I've wanted to do that forever. That is not a first. Anyway. HB 2567, which passed the House and the Committee of the Whole on February 22nd, includes language to eliminate the surcharge. Thank you for that. Additionally, bills in the House Committee on Appropriations, which is 2693, and Senate Committee on Ways and Means, 488 and 512, also include language to eliminate that surcharge. And I'll stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Chairman Sutton. So in regards to that, the elimination of the surcharge, is this just an ask in 2023, or is this going to be an ask by the department in subsequent years?
I would imagine it wasn't necessarily discussed in committee. I can't see a reason for that to go away unless we find another funding mechanism for it.
All right, thank you. Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if the subcommittee chair can give an update or a status if we're moving forward with the docking building. If I remember right, some of the contracts renewed for state office space lease, get that right, state office space leased about, what, 5, 6, 7 years ago now, there were triggers after 3 or 4 years. It was increasing. So I see these numbers increasing in rent. Where are we with those? Did you talk about a plan to eliminate all that and the cost savings? Can you give us some sort of update and where we are with some of that leased space, please?
As far as the cost savings, I can't give you a concrete number on that yet. But yes, there was extensive discussion on that. That's one of the things, wasn't asked necessarily here, but for almost every agency that came in, we were asking, are you renting outside the state, outside from, not from state buildings, or are you leased within state buildings? And so we have a pretty good grasp of the agencies that could potentially move, and the secretary is very on top of wanting to fill that space as quickly as possible.
I just can remember, it seemed like after about year 3, we had some triggers, if we remember right. So anyway, thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, that's an excellent point, and yeah, we certainly discussed that.
Representative Helgerson.
Let's stick with that. Let's stick with that topic. First, why are we not bonding it and paying cash? And why, let's start with that.
That would have been you'd really have to ask the governor for what was the thought process there. I support it because debt is bad. I've kind of.
Glad to hear that. After some votes we've had.
Debt is bad, and when I see people looking to pay cash rather than go into debt, I'm going to cheer that along.
Okay, several years ago, we got into the discussion of tearing down docking. And the legislature in the House decided to stop the contract that we had because we thought it was important to have the heating air conditioned space that was down there, or whatever it is, and not build a separate one. The costs of that was somewhere around $20–30 million to tear it down and to encapsulate it so that we could still use it. Did anybody identify that we needed a museum and additional space in docking or 3 floors of whatever in the now and in the future? And that's why we're spending 120-some million versus 20-some million? I'm weighing. If every other bureaucracy in the country says they need less space, the state of Kansas is going the opposite direction and saying we need a new office building that we're going to tear down part of it, spend $120 million, that is more money than we've ever decided to spend on a museum and office structure and whatever. The financing of this is questionable. Did the committee make any decisions or have any discussion about this?
Chairman Sutton.
That discussion probably took place in the Joint Committee on State Building Construction, not in our budget committee. We had no construction experts in our committee whatsoever.
Okay.
Now, I take a little bit of different tack when you say that we're growing our state office space. That's technically true, growing state office space. But if we can reduce the amount of rented real estate elsewhere throughout the city and/or state, I would have a tough time saying that that's growth. I would say that that's consolidation.
I agree. I guess the policy we have with this and previous administrations is to increase the space that is used by state employees. And now that we're pulling out of COVID, we're going to have more space. Our policy should be, and I'll right up front with this, we should make our government more efficient to fund the increases in salaries for the state employees. We should make it more of advantageous for them to work at home and at the office. But, and I'll get in trouble for this.
Oh, no,
but
keep going for just a minute.
Okay. But the idea that we go ahead and not develop docking office building and have done that as a policy for the last 5 years to help the real estate market and real estate developers is inappropriate. And someone in the general public should start talking about this besides me. You know, I look at $110 million and everybody says, well, it's one-time money. Well, yeah, it's one-time money, and we're going to tear down the building, and we could have redone it years ago. And I look at $110 million. Well, no, we could have done, what, 25% of that tax reduction that you just agreed to, that you voted against me on. You know, I'm going to lose this, I know. I'm not going to make a motion, but I'll make motions later on about this when I have a better audience. But the idea that what we're going to do is give away a good chunk of the $2.7 billion in tax reductions or spending that's not necessary is criminal. So I understand that nothing's going to be done at this, and we're not going to put it up to omnibus, but I'm going to rant and rave more than I have in a long time on the floor about this because I think it's criminal, and I think other people should start banging the drum.
Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. What I'd like to know is, as we get through this, is the price per square foot for the lease. From what I heard years ago was it was cheaper for them to go out to private sector than to take the lease from the Department of Administration. And whatever the best price per square foot is might determine where we ought to go. I mean, that's kind of where I'd make my vote if we could ever figure out what anything is leasing for in the area.
We did have some discussion about price per square foot. That gets into kind of a tricky conversation, and I'd love to go over, you know, the actual real estate listings because we did receive those. But it gets a little tricky because sometimes there's apples and oranges that we're talking about when we're looking at price per square foot. Anyone who's leasing from the Department of Administration is also receiving janitorial service, landscape, maintenance and repair, sidewalk cleaning, all of this sort of thing in addition to just having the office space. So we can have that discussion, and I think it's valid, absolutely, but we also have to make sure that we're taking all expenses into account, not just the price per square foot necessarily.
And I hear that, but it seems like normally the private sector is a little more on top of trying to be competitive with the leases than the state is. So
that has historically absolutely been true. I'm finding that trajectory changing, however. Hey, now I get to use the word rock star. Secretary Burns-Wallace is doing a fantastic job of organizing both the D of A and OITS so that these leases make a lot more sense now. They're a lot more consistent, and you're not finding such. There used to be wide disparities in the price per square foot even, and she's doing a fantastic job of normalizing, smoothing out the budget lines.
Representative Corbett.
well, thank you. But as we get into the docking building and we're tearing down stuff and spending money, and when the state is not growing and government is, it's kind of like how many more people do we have to employ to watch less of us? So that's kind of my comment on that.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because I'm on the Joint Committee on the State Building, I feel like I need to just give a little bit of answer to Representative Helgerson. I just want to assure the committee that Our committee met last summer, last fall. We hashed out over and over. I'm not saying you have to take our word for it. Please speak to Representative Long, who was the chairman of that committee and did a great job. But, you know, we heard why the docking building is different than other buildings. It's got a historical value. It's a piece of architecture, the boiler and everything that's in the basement. You know, we don't need the 14 floors that would have hurt other state agent leases and things that aren't ready to expire yet. So taking it down to 3 floors, you know, we looked at it from the city of Topeka, the downtown renewal commission, whatever. Well, Representative Alcala is also on the committee, and we looked at it from every way. There's so many moving parts. It's not just a simple, what should we do with this building that's next to the Capitol? Because it houses all of our heating and cooling for the whole Capitol complex is one complicating factor. Secretary Burns Wallace is fabulous. I agree. She came to our committee every time we asked her to. She always had her ducks in a row. You know, we had to talk about parking. There's also state agencies that are leasing to own buildings that are in this area. There's all of that to take into consideration. And then there's also that there are some things we need. Yes, maybe government should be shrinking, but we don't have a place for meetings and trainings in the Capitol complex that's appropriate. And there are things that we need that the docking building can offer us in this case. So I just would like to say we looked it over. Of course, the recommendation of the state building committee isn't binding, but we gave our recommendation to the Finance Council, and they looked it all over and made a decision. Then there's also the KDHE lab, which was in the mix, and looking at all the prices of keeping it at 14, taking it down to 6, taking it down to 3. So please, if you'd like more information on how that all happened, speak to Chairman Long about that, or, you know, I'd be happy to speak to you. And I'm not saying you have to take our word for it. I know you can still have your opinion about it, but I would like to assure the committee it's not that it wasn't looked at deeply with all the moving parts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, and thank you, Representative Humphreys, for that analysis of the decision on what to do with docking. And actually this morning I had a meeting with the budget director in regards to the conversation that we had yesterday in regards to the KDHE lab. And the discussion that we had on the amount that it was going to cost to construct that lab. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be having a briefing on docking and the KDHE lab after we're done on March 11th, I believe, with all the budget recommendations before we start working on the budget. So this committee has a full knowledge of exactly how we're moving forward with KDHE lab and the docking building. But thank you for your comments. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 2 questions and follow up on the conversations we just heard. So I know we've been briefed on the document. We've talked about it year after year. We haven't gotten some of the details, as Representative Humphreys mentioned. I don't know if we have the net fiscal impact of moving some employees from one place and those leases to the other. That would be really good information. If we're going to spend $110 million, what's that net impact every year in terms of the savings from not having other leases? And then also, I am going to agree with Representative Helgerson on, we have the rest of the private sector is reducing their footprint. They're reducing their footprint. And I understand we're shifting our footprint. But it is interesting to think that we have probably right now a certain percentage of employees that are working remote. What is that percentage of employees that are working remote? Maybe the chairman could give us that. And what is the projected long-term plan for number of employees working remote? Because most businesses are moving in that direction, at least for some percentage of time or some percentage of employment. And I don't see that particularly being addressed. And I don't know if that's applicable to this situation or not. Thank you.
Chairman Sutton.
Well, I can't answer what other agencies, how many of them are in their offices. Department of Administration is entirely back working in their offices. Now, there are some hybrid situations where maybe people work 3 days on and 2 days remote, but everyone is back back in their space.
And do we know the net impact of the fiscal impact of switching from one location to the other?
I think we're going to have to be a little bit further down the road before we can calculate that with any real certainty.
Well, and I would say when we have that discussion in regards to the facilities for the lab and docking, we could have those projections.
That's all they'd be right
Administered
now
to
with
the
the
committee.
projections, yeah.
Yeah. Representative Corbett.
I'm okay with the docking, whatever's going to happen there, but what I'm concerned about is would like to know, and maybe it comes from building and whatever, but how many office structures we have outside the complex, and who's in them, and the price per square foot, and if they're planning on moving back into docking. And I kind of want to make sure that if a business went in and had to refab a building for a state agency, that they are kind of held, that at least they don't get hurt on the move out. Is kind of where part of the things I'm talking about. But it'd be nice to see what things are renting for and how much stuff is really out there in the community. I don't know. So maybe that's none of our business. I'm just throwing it out.
Oh, that's absolutely.
No, I would say it's part of our business because when I was chair of the General Government Budget Committee 7-8 years ago, we had a discussion in regards to the square footage and how much it was costing the state. And that was when we had agencies moving out of docking and looking at securing leases in the private sector. But that definitely is something that we can have a discussion on. Representative Wolfmore.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have already said that we were going to have a fuller session on this, and I really appreciate that. I think that'll be helpful, but I really appreciate Representative Humphrey speaking up and giving us the facts on this. Thank you very much.
Representative Helgerson.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that you're going to give us some additional time to review this decision. Would you also be open to having a contrary position proposed? We have what the administration is proposing. There may be other individuals out there that have a different position. I myself say, this is what I have seen in the financials over the last 5 years about docking. And either I or other people would maybe like to provide some information. Would that be possible?
Yes, that'd be possible.
Okay. I apologize to the committee for hijacking this.
I don't mind.
But our role is to set policy. Governor Graves, years ago, decided that we should start a policy of reducing the number of state employees. We put it into statute and passed it. And for many years, that was the goal, that we'd start reducing the retirees, and so we'd start shrinking our labor force. Government and the bureaucracy will continue to grow because, in part, that's its nature, and in part, because we have big hearts. And we always see additional needs. But we should also set policy for the administration and tell them we either want more employees or we want less employees. We want to have less office space or we want to have more office space. We want to have a health care policy for everybody in the state or we don't. We do some of those. But we also stop our recommendations and, because we have other concerns or the governor takes that. And it's our goal to set those directions. If you don't want to set the directions, you're going to let the governor and the bureaucracy run that. So thank you for your time.
Representative Alcala.
The representative did recognize that I am on the committee. Sometimes you can say something that just doesn't make a difference. But I will reference Representative Corbett's question. The lease agreements that we're in outside of state agencies, they escalate over the years to a large amount of money. Don't forget, Joint Committee on Building Construction is made up of some very conservative people on there, more conservatives than not. The early out cost to those leases, I can't remember the dollar amount, but we could find it out, was tremendous. And it would cover anything that the private owner had that leased the building to the state to have enough money to get by until they bring other businesses in or promote it. But whoever did those contracts, I don't know who they were, and I'm not putting blame on nobody, they were definitely a private owner's dream for those state agencies that went in there. When they talked about the big conference room and the more space, it was calculated with the cost savings over a period of time because we pay for training space outside of the state agencies. We pay for large meetings when we have lots of state agencies come back in to meet. So that was the reason for the second or third amendment to reduce the docking building to another level. I agreed. I voted no because there was a process I didn't like, but I agreed with the committee's recommendation because, and I think maybe Burns Wallace might be an individual if you want to refer to for questions. I think she did a good job in her presentations. But I think the calculations, everything showed that it was going to be more cost effective and more streamlined for the recommendation, for what the committee decided to recommend to the body. So I would tell you that, in my opinion, there was some streamlining and cost savings. I think the private individuals that we lease from, I think they set themselves up in the contract very well. That's like when we don't want to end those contracts because we can't afford it. So we have to let a lot of them run out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Corbett.
Just to reference that back, Representative, are the leases that you're referring to, how do they compare with what the Department of Administration is charging for a lease space?
So this is my recollection, and you might verify it. I think that the leases we're in right now exceed what the state is for lease space. And I can't remember the dollar amounts, but I remember that conversation coming up. I just can't remember the details, so I don't want to mislead you, but I think it'd be something that you might want to ask the question. I think there was a big difference. I don't know if the representative remembers or not, but
And just to reiterate, I mean, I've already said that we're going to be having a discussion in regards to the lab and the docking building, and these are questions that can be posed to the Secretary of Administration in regards to the leasing amounts and leasing space. I think we're going on a tangent here that doesn't really, it pertains to the Department of Administration's budget, but it's a further discussion that we need to have with the Secretary.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Chair. That's why I was hesitant on speaking.
Any further discussion? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I may have been hearing things in my head versus what was said, but was there a mention of paying off the 253 layering payments at one point? Or am I making that up?
Chairman Sutton.
I'm sorry, I was involved in a sidebar conversation. Go ahead. I'm trying to get all of the lease agreements emailed out to you all, so
thank you for that. I haven't been able to find it, but I thought I heard mention of paying off the 253 layering payments. Was that mentioned anywhere in this budget? Okay.
Not in D of A.
Thanks, appreciate that.
Yeah, the paying off the layer payment would not be in the Department of Administration's budget. It'd be in another budget. As a recommendation from the governor, because that's what she recommended in her budget herself.
And
that
was in the education budget, I think.
So sorry for my mishearing that. Just wanted to make sure.
That's all right.
That
I didn't
was
hear
clear.
you the first time either, so it's okay.
Any further discussion on fiscal year 2023? Chairman Sutton.
I would like to make a note, by the way, just because the water's not muddy enough already. Let's complicate things just a little bit more. That $120 million is probably the maximum spend because they are seeking federal funding to supplement that construction. If it's successful, then we're probably looking at half with a 50-50 split.
Well, and as we discussed yesterday, and as we're going to have further discussion in regards to the lab and also docking, on December 17th, the State Finance Council approved $92.5 million from the State Federal Relief Fund, or the ARPA money, in regards to the refurbishing of docking and the lab. And we'll have that discussion when we have that here in committee. Any further discussion in regards to fiscal year 2023? Seeing none, Chairman Sutton.
All right, I'd like to move the committee recommendations for the Department of Administration for years 2022 and 2023.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Burrows. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Chairman Sutton.
All right, now we're going to go to what is now my favorite budget, OITS. Once upon a time, I'd have to psych myself up to present this one to you guys, but not anymore. All right. The agency requests for 2022 an estimate of $4.3 million. That's all SGF for on-budget expenditures. The revised estimate is the same as the 22 approved budget, including $43,000 in expenditures from the GIS Contracting Services Fund to support, oddly enough, GIS for the community, for user community in Kansas. The agency revised estimate also includes $51.5 million in off-budget expenditures, all from special revenue funds, which is an increase of $397,000 above the 22 approved budget. Off-budget expenditures are categorized as such so that we don't count them twice. The increase can be primarily be attributed to the agency adding $1 million to its salary and wages expenditures by eliminating its shrinkage rate. Expenditures related to desktop as a service and the purchases of equipment for other state agencies, which was $700,000. Increased utilization of data center as a service offered by OITS. Implementation of IT projects for OITS programs, contractual service costs associated with Cisco, SmartNet, and state network maintenance. Also, a slight bump in increased travel and sustenance. The increase is partially offset by the cancellation of a planned IT security project, fluctuations in utilization of OITS services and indirect costs related to such services, reduced rent expenditures related to the land and building data center. I don't know if you guys remember that hullabaloo. That was a building that wasn't supposed to house a mainframe, was housing a mainframe, and we finally have moved it out of there. So that's excellent news, by the way. Also, the elimination of computer equipment purchases, decreased expenditures for salaries, wages, and fringe benefits, and reduced purchases of telecommunication equipment for state network maintenance. The revised estimate also includes 115 off-budget FTE positions for 22, which is an increase of 1.8 above the 22 approved number. The increase is due to the conversion of part-time and temporary staff to full-time employees. The governor concurred, and so did we.
All right. Seeing no discussion in regards to 22, move on to 23.
All right. The agency request is $4.3 million SGF for on-budget expenditures. The revised estimate is the same as the 22 revised estimate. Included in this amount is the $43,000 from the GIS Contracting Services Fund. The 2023 request also includes $51.5 million in off-budget expenditures, which is a decrease of $80,000 below the 22 revised estimate. Off-budget expenditures, to avoid double counting. The decrease can be primarily attributed to reduced expenditures associated with purchases made on behalf of other agencies for IT equipment and peripherals, payments to third-party vendors for operation of the Unisys data center and state mainframe. By the way, Unisys mainframe is now located in Kansas. There for a while, it was, Wisconsin or something like that. And so I was very pleased to hear that our state money is supporting a Kansas business, or a business at least partially located in Kansas now. Also, completion of internal IT projects present in the 22 revised estimate for implementation of new ServiceNow modules and Aptio. Elimination of rent for the land and state office building. $150,000 we're saving on that. Oh, that's lovely. And the absence of expenditures for passenger vehicles that were present in 22, but they don't need to replace again in 23. The decrease is partially offset by increased off-budget expenditures for 3-year license renewal of the IT security product offered by Splunk. Horrible name. For the Kansas Information Security Offices, increased cost for project management software licenses and salaries, wages, and associated benefits costs from across state agencies, state agency programs. The request also includes 117 off-budget FTE positions, which is an increase of 2. The increase is to accommodate increased use of services offered by the Hosted Services Program for the Unisys Data Center. The governor concurred, and so did we. And this was the most painless budget analysis for OITS that I've ever seen.
Well, that's nice to hear. Committee, are there any questions in regards to fiscal year 2023? Seeing none, Chairman Sutton.
I will move the committee recommendations for the OITS budget 2022 and 2023.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Burrows. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, thank you, Chairman Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, committee, we're going to go ahead and move on to 3 bill hearings that we're going to be having this morning. And first, we're going to be having the bill hearing on House Bill 2592. And so I would invite Amy Deckard to the podium to give us a briefing on House Bill 2592, which is making and concerning supplemental appropriations for fiscal years 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025 for various state agencies. Amy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With your permission, I'm going to go ahead and do them both together.
All right, that sounds fine.
So you should have a lilac bill explanation in front of you. It's for both House Bill 2588 and 2592. So 2592 and 2588 include adjusted funding for fiscal years 2022 and fiscal years 2023 for state agencies and capital improvement expenditures for a number of state agencies. House Bill 2592 is the supplemental bill. So it's a summary of changes for the approved fiscal year 2022 expenditures. The 2022 budget approved by the 2021 legislature totaled $20.7 billion, including $8.3 billion from the State General Fund for fiscal year 2022. The approved budget did include $193.5 million in SGF reappropriations from fiscal years 2021. The governor's recommendation totals $23 billion from all funding sources, with $9.3 billion from the State General Fund for fiscal years 2022. The recommendation increases total expenditures by $1.2 billion and increases State General Fund expenditures by $2.1 billion above the fiscal year 2021 actual expenditures. The governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2022 is an all funds increase of $2.3 billion or 11.1% and a State General Fund increase of $994 million or 11.9% above the fiscal year 2022 approved budget. The increases is primarily attributable to adding $460 million, all from the State General Fund for the residential tax rebate, adding $332.2 million, all from the State General Fund for early debt retirement in the Department of Administration. Those are those 2 bonds that Representative Sutton mentioned in his report out today. Adding $20 million, all from the State General Fund in the Department of Commerce to expand the moderate income housing program. Adding $731.9 million, including $375.4 million from the State General Fund to the Department of Education, including the $199.5 million from the State General Fund to eliminate delayed state aid payments, adding $253.9 million from the State General Fund to eliminate the CAPERS layering payments, adding $336.5 million for the Emergency School Federal Fund relief at the top of page 2, adding $64.9 million, including $48.5 million from the State General Fund to the Department of Corrections, adding $18.1 million from the State General Fund for Highway Patrol aircraft, deleting $184.7 million from the State Highway Fund related to delayed construction on State Highway 69, and deleting $72.5 million, including $173.2 million from the State General Fund to implement revised human service caseloads, largely related to the extension of the enhanced federal medical assistance percentage. Moving to the expenditures for fiscal years 2023, so this would be the mega bill in House Bill 2588. The governor's recommendation totals $22.6 billion, including $8.9 billion from the State General Fund. This is an all funds decrease of $405.3 million or 1.8%, and a State General Fund decrease of $423.2 million or 4.5% below the fiscal year 2022 governor's recommendation. For state operations, the governor's fiscal year 2023 recommendation for state operations is $6.7 billion. This is an increase of $84.8 million or 1.3% above the fiscal year 2022 recommendation. It's primarily attributable to the Department of Commerce grant programs and enhancements, state employee pay adjustments, and the Department of Corrections 24/7 pay plan and enhancements, partially offset by reductions in one-time expenditures and reductions in federal funding. For local units of government, the governor's recommendation is $7.1 billion, a decrease of $207.5 million, or 2.9% below the revised estimate for 2022, primarily attributable to reduced education state aid and COVID-19 pandemic relief funding decreased in the Department of Health and Environment. These are partially offset by increases in the Board of Regents, student financial assistance, and $13 million for the state treasurer to implement the proposed food sales tax elimination. At the top of page 3, for other assistance, the governor's recommendation for other assistance benefits is $7.1 billion, a decrease of $128.2 million, or 1.8% below the 2022 revised estimate. The decrease is primarily attributable to the resident tax rebate, unemployment benefits, and DCF funding for the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program, water assistance, and child care providers. These are partially offset by an increase in KDHE Health for Medicaid expansion. For capital improvements, the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2023 is $1.8 billion, a decrease of $154.4 million, or 8% below the revised estimate. This decrease is primarily attributable to accelerated debt retirement in 2022. If I could turn your attention to page 5. Would note some additional details about the governor's recommendation for a broad-based salary increase for fiscal year 2023. This is the second paragraph from the bottom on page 5. The governor's recommendation appropriates $145.5 million, including $56.8 million from the state general fund for a 5% state employee base pay adjustment. This would increase salaries for classified and unclassified employees in the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. Legislators and elected officials, teachers at the schools for the blind and the deaf, and the Kansas Highway Patrol troopers would be excluded from the salary adjustment. These funds would be appropriated to and certified for distribution by the State Finance Council if approved. In addition to the 5% base salary adjustment, the governor's recommendation includes $56 million off from the state general fund to extend the salary adjustment for the 24/7 facilities where staffing shortages due to the COVID-19 pandemic. At the top of page 6, for both fiscal years 22 and 23, the governor recommends funding longevity bonuses for eligible state employees. Also in the middle of page 6, you see the other recommendations by the governor for state employee salary adjustments. Briefly, I might note at the top or on page 8, you see other adjustments recommended by the governor from all funds, including Medicaid expansion, Regents grant programs, Medicaid caseloads, judicial branch increases, as well as a decrease noted due to that 2022 aircraft purchases for the Highway Patrol. On page 12, might note the governor's proposed revenue adjustments for fiscal year 2022 included transferring $600 million from the state general fund to the budget stabilization fund, transferring $5 million to the job creation program fund, reducing the transfer to the adjutant general state emergency fund by $8.6 million from the state general fund. For fiscal year 2023, reduces revenue by $462 million from the state general fund to eliminate the state food sales tax, transfers an additional $31.5 million from the state general fund to the job creation program fund, reduces revenue by $10 million from the state general fund to provide tax credits for creative industries, eliminates the transfers from the Securities Act fee fund in the insurance department, reducing revenue to the state general fund by $5.1 million, and adds $1.5 million in other state general fund adjustments, resulting in the profile you see at the top of page 13. Be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Amy. Committee, are there any questions for Amy in regards to House Bill 2592 and House Bill 2588? Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a feeling there's going to be a significant discussion on this, but I did want to look at on page 5, you said that legislative and elected officials, and I get that we're not voting our own pay raise, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. But does that include all legislative staff as well? Would not be eligible?
Mr. Chairman, and I apologize, this is not worded in the best manner. It would only exclude elected officials, so legislative staff would be eligible for the 5%. So I apologize for the misleading wording.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions for Amy in regards to these two House bills? All right, seeing none, thank you, Amy. I'm actually not showing anybody as a proponent for House Bill 2592 or House Bill 2588. So if there's anybody in the audience that wishes to testify as a proponent, here's your chance. And I'm also not showing anybody with neutral or opponent testimony for House Bill 2592 or House Bill 2588. So here's your chance if you wish to testify in opposition or a neutral testimony. And I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to be closing the hearing on House Bill 2592 and House Bill 2588. Thank you again, Amy, for the briefing on those two House bills for the budget. Okay, we're going to move on to the next bill hearing, and that is going to be House Bill 2712, and that is establishing the Kansas Commission for the United States Semi-Quincentennial. And Jesse Pringle is going to be giving us a brief on House Bill 2712. Jesse?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, almost afternoon, committee. In 2026, it's going to be the 250th anniversary of the United States founding. So this bill was introduced in anticipation of that anniversary. So what this bill does, Bill 2712, is that it establishes a Kansas Commission for the United States Semi-Quincentennial. If this sounds familiar to you, it is because this committee saw House Bill 2353 last session, amended it due to the membership of the commission, and it was passed to the floor. This is a new bill that does a lot of the same things, but there are two differences in this one. Due to ERO 48, where tourism from Wildlife Parks and Tourism was transferred to the Department of Commerce. Anywhere in the previous bill, it said the Secretary of Wildlife Parks and Tourism is now Secretary of Commerce. And this bill also has some changes in the membership of the commission. So to refresh you on some of the duties and items that this commission can do in celebration of the 250th anniversary, the commission is charged to plan, encourage, develop, and coordinate the commemoration of the anniversary. It is directed to cooperate with the United States Commission for this, state agencies, boards, commissions, departments, and political subdivisions to execute events and implement educational activities around the anniversary. The commission would be a part of the Department of Commerce as the Office of Tourism, as that has been now transferred. And the commission would be composed of 20 members. And those members would include the Secretary of Commerce, the Executive Director of the Kansas African American Affairs Commission, the Executive Director of the Kansas Hispanic and Latino American Affairs Commission, the Executive Director of the Kansas State Historical Society, a member of the House of Representatives to be appointed by the Speaker, a member of the majority party of the House to be appointed by the Majority Leader, a member of the minority party of the House to be appointed by the Minority Leader, and then for the Senate side, one member of the Senate to be appointed by the President, one member of the majority party of the Senate to be appointed by the Majority Leader in the Senate, and then a member of the minority party of the Senate to be appointed by the Minority Leader of the Senate. And then continuing, membership would include the state regent of the Kansas Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, the president of the Kansas Society, Sons of the American Revolution, the president of the Kansas Historical Foundation, a professor of American history from a higher education institution, a teacher of American history from a public school, a representative appointed by the Kansas Native American Affairs Office, the commander of the Kansas American Legion, the commander of the Department of Kansas Veterans of Foreign Wars, the president of the Sunflower Sampler Foundation, and lastly, the chairperson of the Kansas State Fair Board. So what this section does is it allows the commission to hold meetings, sets out the election of the chairperson, and the term of that chairperson. The meetings of the commission would be public. The commission is also required to submit a report on recommendations for commemorating the event, and then as well as an annual report from then on until 2027. In order to execute the duties, there's a fund established. This bill has no appropriations in it at the moment. The commission would be authorized to accept gifts and donations that could be put into the fund. And then lastly, once the celebrating is over, on December 31st of 2027, the commission in this section would expire, and then all the funds and items that are left from the commission would be transferred into the EDIF fund in commerce. And then any property would be donated to local municipalities or state agencies. And I'm available for questions on House Bill 2712 on the semi-quincentennial.
All right, thank you, Jesse, for that analysis of 2712. Committee, are there any questions for the revisor's office? Seeing none, Representative Rogers.
Sorry. Kansas Sampler Foundation, why were they chosen? Because I think that's kind of a private, it's like a family, right? It's kind of an offshoot of, I'm just trying to figure out, there's other foundations that do things for the state. I'm just trying to figure out why, who decided they were the ones, the chosen ones to have a seat on this board?
Jesse.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that would be a great question for the conferees today.
Okay.
Representative Estes.
I was going to address that in my testimony. I can do that later if you prefer.
All right, thank you. Any further questions for the revisor's office? Seeing none, thank you for the analysis on House Bill 2712. The first conferee that I have in regards to proponent testimony this morning is actually a member of the Kansas Legislature and the House of Representatives, and that would be Representative Susan Estes.
Thank you very much. And committee, yes, this bill we talked about extensively last year. I had been working at a national level to look at what Kansas could do, and Representative Carlin had been working here at the state level, and so it's nice to work to move this together. We didn't come above the line last year, but the time gave us a chance to think about Kansas was a leader in the nation last year. We won several significant awards, not last year, in the bicentennial. We won an award for the All-American Indian Center in Wichita. Our state fair was recognized for a national award, and that kind of got me to thinking about redoing the committee a little bit. So we did decide to be more intentional about using the celebration as an economic driver to promote Kansas products. So that's why we looked at Sunflower Sampler, and also made us realize that we had left out the state fair, and both of those organizations promote products, but they also have a large internal network for helping to communicate with at a grassroots level around the state on tourism and so forth. So we made that change so that we would be able to connect better across the state. Then we also added in being more intentional about including those who serve our country and going to the American Legion and the VFW, and making sure that we really give them a strong voice in celebrating our history. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Representative Estes. Committee, are there any questions for the representative? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next proponent testimony that I have, and that is Kimberly Patrick with the Daughters of the American Revolution, and she is with us in committee. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Waymaster and committee members. I am Kimberly Patrick, and I appreciate this opportunity to address you in favor of Bill 2712. I'm asking for your support on this to create the Kansas Commission for the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial. This bill will develop a committee that will put Kansas at the forefront of the nation in celebrating our nation's founding. Like many of you, I have patriotism running through my blood. My father was a veteran of World War II, of Korea, and Vietnam. I have numerous ancestors that fought for the support of the American Revolution, including my 5 times great-grandfather who died at one of the last battles, the Battle of Blue Lick. So you can see that I really want this bill to go forward and for us to really support the semi-quincentennial. By doing this, we are celebrating the freedoms that we have and celebrating those that fought for our freedoms and continue to fight for our freedoms. Thank you for considering this bill, and thank you all for serving the citizens of Kansas. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Ms. Patrick. Committee, are there any questions for Ms. Patrick? Seeing none, thank you again for being here this morning. All right, committee, I am showing that the other individuals that we have in proponent testimony is written testimony, and that would be the first from Daniel DeLella from the United States Semi-Quincentennial Commission, Susan Metzger, and then also from Laura Renfro. Is there anybody else that wishes to provide proponent testimony in regards to House Bill 2712? Representative Estes.
I just would like to mention that Susan Metzger and Laura Renfro were able to hop online. I did, in light of the time, I understand if you don't have time to call on them, but if the committee finds it helpful, they are available.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I just had them down as written testimony for today. All right, seeing no other proponent testimony, we'll go ahead and move on to neutral or opponent testimony. I'm not having anybody that wishes to testify before the committee in neutral or opponent, so we'll be closing the hearing on House Bill 2712. And thank you again, Ms. Patrick, for being here this morning, and Representative Estes. All right, committee, I mentioned yesterday that we were going to have final action on House Bill 2541, and to basically give us a refresher on House Bill 2541, which is regarding the judicial branch docket fees, Jill Walters is going to be giving us an update. Jill?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We had a hearing on this bill on February 9th, so you might recall that or pull your file folder out. What this bill does is credit certain docket fees and other additional fees to the state general fund instead of some judicial branch funds. So specifically, currently docket fees and additional fees that we typically call the surcharge fee, those fees are deposited and credited to the judicial branch docket fee fund, the judicial branch non-judicial salary adjustment fund, and the judicial branch non-judicial salary initiative fund, and then a portion of marriage license fees and driver's license reinstatement fees are credited to the judicial branch non-judicial salary adjustment fund. And so what this bill would do would be take all those docket fees, the additional surcharge fees, and then the portion of the marriage license fee and the reinstatement fees, and that money would be credited to the state general fund instead of those individual funds. I'd be pleased to stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Jill. Committee, are there any questions for Jill in regards to House Bill 2541? All right, seeing none. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we pass out House Bill 2541 favorable.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Wolfmore. Discussion on the motion. Representative Estes.
I find myself very uncomfortable with this and in this, and if being not unseasoned, but certainly less seasoned, is there any other place in the budget where we allow someone to do this? It's a question that's been in my mind, and I haven't found an answer other than an absence of an answer. And I feel like we set a really dangerous precedent by making this move, and I just find myself finding it difficult to support this. And I just wanted to say that, so if there's someone who wants me to look at it a different way, you've got the opportunity.
Well, and if I recall back on the testimony from the Chief Justice, and Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is the way it was set up years ago, that it was funded by SGF. And it was just, I don't know exactly the year time frame when it changed to be completely fee funded, or they received all their revenue from fees. But if you recall last year, when we did the budget bill for then fiscal year 2020, if I remember right, due to the pandemic, because the judicial branch is heavily relied on just their employee base, there was a shortage because the courts were shut down. They did not receive the fee structure, and they had to come to the legislature just for operating purposes. And I'm not saying this is going to negate it, but it's going back to what was previously done in regards to the judicial branch, because it is a third branch of government. We have to fund all three branches of what's stated in the Constitution. And in no way is this going to eliminate the need that if a pandemic would ever happen in the future, we would have to allocate funding, but at least this would be a state fund allocation year after year after year for fiscal solvency for a third branch of government. Representative Estes.
Thank you. And I've supported that funding that we did last year because, and that actually made me feel comfortable with not supporting this, because there will be times that something that we never can anticipate happens, and we had the ability to address it. But I did find a frustration that, yes, anybody could file, but the filing fees were impacted by the headlines that constantly said courts closed. And I found it very disappointing that some counties took an extremely long time to come back on, and I think that aggravated it. So so that's part of what's in my mind. Thank you.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, part of your reticence is the argument for this bill. Not entirely. The slow to come back, okay, that's valid, and I support that. What we're really looking here is, first off, they are not entirely fee funded. They're about 80% SGF already. This is about 20% of their funding, give or take, fuzzy math. But one of the things that is funded through these funds are salaries. All right, they're funding salaries with an essentially volatile funding source. Now, your salaries shouldn't, in most cases, be particularly volatile. That should be a relative constant. And so the thought process behind this, and you agree or disagree, I understand, that's fine. But the thought process behind this is basically like any portfolio. In order to accommodate volatility, you diversify. The SGF has a much broader base for funding, so the SGF, while it does fluctuate, certainly not as much as the court docket fee fund. So this is basically just trying to hedge volatility with a somewhat more constant revenue source. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would go even a little bit farther in that this actually, to me, brings more back to the appropriations than in the past, because now we will have more control over that appropriations. I mean, right now, they get that money directly, and it's for them. Now they would have to come to us and say, hey, we need this amount of money for this appropriations. And so I think in a way it brings it back. The other thing is that, and I know we've had these conversations in the past, in that some of these fees are getting very high and almost detrimental for people to be able to file and to go to court. And it's always been, well, if we lower that fee, it's going to impact the judicial system. And this way, if we decide, okay, yeah, we want to lower that fee, it's going to impact how much we're getting into SGF, but it's not going to necessarily impact the judicial system. So I really think this is a good move to not only bring us in maybe more of into the appropriations, but also to allow us as we go forward to look at those fees and decide if they are really at the level we want them to be. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too will speak as a proponent to this. You know, we hear in corrections and judiciary bills regularly and have to have the judiciary show up and say, well, if you pass this piece of legislation that, for example, decreases the fees for expungements, for example, after you've served your sentence and done your time, well, you've got to increase our budget. So it's a constant every time we want to make a policy decision that we're impacting what they're doing. And I think this is, in my mind, a great solution to have it come out of the SGF so that we can continue to make policy decisions, address those things here in the budget process as well as it relates to any type of judicial or criminal justice reform type issues. Thank you.
Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this also, and I really think Representative Sutton made a really good point. So, you know, their case full of ebbs and flows, like maybe December, they don't issue as many marriage licenses, or so that ebbs and flows, but their fixed expenses stay the same. And so we're just kind of smoothing it out for them. They'll end up probably with the same number or the same amount financially at the end of the year, but we're trying to account for that up and down in the fees that they take in while still having to pay their same expenses. So I think this is a good solution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to oppose this. I think that the courts should have been working the whole time, and I think that they actually drug their feet. We were here, other agencies, businesses were working the whole time. Courts were closed. The backlogs are 2 and 3 years out. I think that this just, what's going to happen the next time that they decide to slow down and not operate? So they're going to have guaranteed funding. So it just is a problem.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will support this. The courts were not totally shut down. They were doing a lot of work remotely and by computer. And part of that was just trying to keep in touch. They couldn't have the dockets and they couldn't have them all in the little courtrooms and everything else. And I can only account for what maybe Lawrence, Kansas was doing. So I don't know about everyone else, but they were managing that. But I think the point that Representative Sutton made says this is like, your money comes from the outside sources. If people are not coming in, they're not paying it. And if this doesn't happen, you have an iffy budget. What if they did that to us? You know we are covered in this. We may not like what we make, but we're covered. If other people have budgets, we know what's going to happen. In this case, what if we didn't know what we would have this year or next year or the next year, depending on outside sources? We can't operate that way because we all have responsibilities, things we have to pay, things we have to do for our kids, our families, our husbands, our wives, and everything else. I think this at least makes it as steady across the board. And if they need more, they have to come back and justify it. And I think they have justified why they need that increase. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Concanon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I think that philosophically, I've always stood by the fact that fees should come through appropriations and we should be the appropriators. We are always looking for efficiencies, so I think that this bill will provide for some predictability and stability for the system, and that makes it more streamlined and efficient. So I support the bill. Thank you.
Representative Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe I view this a little different. I view this as a olive branch from the judicial branch to the legislature to be more trusting in one another in the process that we look at when we do the budget, go through the budget process. So I think it's a great risk on behalf of the judicial branch. I raised that question with them, but I'm excited to hear and appreciate and respect the comments I've heard from my colleagues on appropriations in reference to the continued funding of the judicial branch. So I'm going to rise in support of the bill, but I do want to say that I think this is a point of trust between us and our partners in government, the judicial branch.
Representative Helgerson.
I'm not stating a position on this, but I wanted to make a point. Fees are put on to pay the additional costs. We're not usually set up in a good way of evaluating whether or not the fees are too high or too low. Once you've taken away the push from the judiciary to have fees too high or reduce the fees, you know, I just pose the question, who in here is going to be able to go out and say, that fee for, this case is too high and we need to reduce it. We've gotten into the expungement issue, in the last few years, but, who's going to come in next year and say, well, our fees have been out of whack and the legislature or the budget committee should reduce them. I just mentioned that, so whoever can you can figure out who wants to reduce the fees or who's going to be the advocate for reducing fees. Second thing, we automatically pass the budgets quite often for the legislature and the governor, whatever they come in. The judiciary, what is it? I don't remember. Was it 20 million, 30 million, 10 million of additional funds they want for new courts around? They come in regularly with more. Pardon me?
We'll hear their budget next week.
Okay, 15. They come in regularly with additional increases because they want to expand the court system. Okay? If we're accepting the other side of the agency, are we just going to automatically give that now that they're put back to where they were previously? Whoever wants to make that decision, but you set yourself up where the legislature is pretty much set, governor's pretty much set, and now all their increases that come in, I don't know who's going to control them.
Representative Carlin.
Remember that when this change was made, as I think you referenced, or Representative Hoffman did, it was very controversial. Did we want people who are using the services of the court to support the court? Because it's a philosophical thing to me. It's justice, and we have to provide for justice. And to me, we need to fund the agency that provides the justice. And I'm really pleased that this opportunity is here, that we get away from the people who need the services of the courts, paying for the courts. It just doesn't seem right to me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion in regards to House Bill 2541, since I think every committee member has had a chance to make some comments, or for a second time? Any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Hoffman, you may move your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move my motion.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of passing out House Bill 2541 favorably for passage, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. House Bill 2541 is passed out of committee. Okay, we are going to be starting session, even though it's pro forma today, in about 5 minutes. I just wanted to let you know I am anticipating that we're going to have pro forma tomorrow. So we are moving all of the items for the committee meeting that we had scheduled for tomorrow morning onto Monday. So Chairman Francis, with the Transportation and Public Safety Budget Committee, will be having the Kansas Department of Transportation and the Department Correction Systems on Monday, as will Chairperson Humphreys with the higher education budget. So with those changes made to tomorrow's agenda, we are not having committee tomorrow morning. We will resume the discussions on Monday at 9 a.m. And if you had been paying attention, Representative Williams will be providing breakfast because there was a phone malfunction on Monday. And so you'll definitely want to be here at 9 a.m. To be here. Representative Ballard.
I just have a quick one. I think you better eat a little bit before you come, though. But I just want to just remind, if you don't know, there's going to be a rally on the South Steps for the Ukraine. And so everybody is invited to just come on the South Steps. I guess there's a student speaking.
Time?
I heard in the paper it said 11. 11:30. I mean, on my phone, but between 11:30. But they'll be there and everyone's welcome. I'm not organizing it. I just said I would just make sure people knew that it was going on.
All right. Representative Johnson.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if you were able to return to the item of introduction of bills, I was
yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would request for introduction RS 3277. It's enacting the Pharmacy Benefits Manager Licensure Act. It's work that the pharmacy benefit managers and the pharmacists have completed to have us consider.
All right, committee, you've heard the bill introduction, seconded by Representative Carlin. All those in favor of the bill introduction, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Bill is introduced. Is there any other discussion for this morning before we adjourn? All right, seeing none, committee, we are adjourned until 9 a.m. on Monday. What day is that? March 7th, with breakfast provided by Representative Williams. We are adjourned.